For 9 years, Nora Whitaker had been the person executives called whenever a crisis threatened to swallow Horizon Meridian, a logistics technology company headquartered in Denver, Colorado, because she had a talent for turning impossible deadlines into signed contracts and broken departments into functioning teams. Yet at the company's annual leadership retreat in a mountain lodge outside Aspen, the CEO, Victor Hale, introduced her to investors as Nina. Then laughed when she quietly corrected him and joked that names were less important than keeping the machine moving. Nora smiled because she had learned long ago that embarrassment was often easier to survive than confrontation. But she noticed something else that afternoon when the CFO, Marissa Cole, avoided her questions about the company's promised performance pool and quickly changed the subject whenever Nora mentioned the record-breaking year her division had produced. The following morning, Victor gathered the senior staff in a glass conference room overlooking snow-covered peaks and announced that Horizon Meridian had exceeded its annual targets by 34%, earning its largest profit in company history. And when Nora's department received a standing ovation for rescuing 3 major accounts that had been moments away from leaving, she finally believed the bonus mentioned in her employment agreement would be honored. Instead of the substantial performance payout Nora had been expecting, Victor unveiled a new recognition initiative involving engraved acrylic plaques, branded backpacks, and a catered breakfast that consisted mostly of muffins, fruit, and coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through cardboard. And when someone cautiously asked whether the performance pool would still be distributed, Victor smiled and replied, "We decided culture is more valuable than cash," as if he had personally discovered a revolutionary economic theory. Nora watched her 12-person team absorb the news in stunned silence, especially Evan Brooks, her senior account strategist who had worked through weekends to save the company's largest European client, and Priya Shah, a young analyst who had spent 6 months rebuilding a forecasting system after the previous one nearly caused a multi-million-dollar reporting disaster. While Nora herself felt something inside her shift from disappointment to suspicion, because Victor's presentation was not merely insulting. It was carefully designed to make everyone feel grateful for receiving almost nothing. That evening, Nora returned home to her small house near Boulder and spread every document connected to her compensation agreement across the dining table, while her husband Daniel watched quietly from the kitchen. And instead of venting, she began comparing the original contract, quarterly forecasts, board-approved budgets, email promises, and internal compensation spreadsheets until she discovered a strange pattern that made her stop breathing for a moment. A portion of the company's performance pool had apparently been approved months earlier, but the money had never reached the employees who earned it, and even stranger, several executive compensation documents contained last-minute revisions that moved millions of dollars into a newly created strategic retention reserve, controlled almost entirely by Victor and Marissa, which meant the cheap breakfast and plastic plaques were not an unfortunate cost-cutting decision at all. They were camouflage. Nora did not confront anyone immediately because she understood that powerful people rarely panic when accused without preparation. But they became extremely nervous when someone quietly collected facts they could not explain away. So she created a private timeline showing every major contract her department had secured, every promise management had made, every compensation change, and every unusual financial adjustment she could verify from records she was legitimately entitled to access. The next morning, she also received an unexpected message from Caleb Mercer, a former Horizon Meridian executive who had left 2 years earlier, saying, "I heard they're changing the story about who built the recovery plan, and if you're asking questions, check what happened to the North Star account after it was transferred upstairs," which immediately caught Nora's attention because North Star had been her department's biggest turnaround success, and its revenue had mysteriously disappeared from her team's quarterly performance calculations. Nora spent the next several days investigating the North Star discrepancy and discovered that the account had not disappeared at all. Instead, its renewal revenue had been reassigned to an executive-led, strategic partnerships division that had contributed almost nothing to the deal, allowing Victor's inner circle to claim credit for work Nora's team had completed months earlier. When she confronted Marissa with the discrepancy, the CFO leaned back in her chair and said, "Nora, you're looking at numbers like an employee instead of thinking like an executive." And Nora calmly replied, "Then explain why the numbers change whenever the people receiving the credit change." After which Marissa stopped smiling, told her she was overthinking routine accounting, and ended the meeting within 4 minutes. That answer was all Nora needed to know, so instead of fighting for recognition inside a company that had already decided to erase her contribution, she began preparing for something far more consequential, quietly contacting Summit Arc, a growing competitor whose founder, Lee Bennett, had tried to recruit her several times before. Lee listened to Nora's concerns without interrupting, and then offered something Nora had never received from Horizon Meridian: complete authority to build her own division, a significant salary increase, profit participation, and the freedom to recruit the people she trusted most. But Nora made one condition clear before agreeing. She would not move until every member of her team had a secure option, and until the transition could be handled professionally without violating contracts or confidential information. Back at Horizon Meridian, Victor grew increasingly suspicious of Nora's calm behavior and suddenly began inviting her to meetings he had previously excluded her from, while a newly promoted manager named Grant Phelps started sitting in on her client calls and asking strangely specific questions about account relationships, renewal dates, and internal processes. Nora recognized the tactic immediately. They were trying to make her uncomfortable enough to resign before she could uncover anything important, but she responded by becoming almost impossibly cooperative, documenting every handoff, answering every question in writing, and refusing to give anyone an emotional reaction that could later be used against her. Meanwhile, her team noticed what was happening. And during a private lunch, Evan finally asked, "Are they trying to push you out?" Nora looked around the table and answered, "I don't know what they're planning, but I know we should all understand our options before somebody else chooses them for us." Over the next 2 weeks, Nora helped each team member update their professional portfolios and evaluate outside opportunities without promising anything. And when Summit Arc eventually extended offers to the entire group, she gave everyone time to decide independently because she refused to turn loyalty into pressure. Priya accepted first, followed by Evan, then Marcus Reed, Tessa Monroe, Jamal Carter, and the rest of the department. And the most emotional moment came when quiet junior analyst Lily Chen looked at Nora and said, "For the first time, I don't feel like leaving means failing," which reminded Nora that this was never really about revenge. It was about proving that people who had been treated as disposable could choose where their future belonged. Then, 3 days before the company's quarterly investor meeting, Nora received an anonymous message containing a spreadsheet she had never seen before. And when she compared it with the documents she had already collected, she realized the situation was bigger than stolen bonuses, because executive compensation had been calculated using inflated revenue figures, while employee performance had been deliberately reduced on internal reports. Nora immediately contacted an employment attorney, preserved the evidence through lawful means, and provided the relevant information to the company's independent audit committee, rather than leaking anything publicly. And within 48 hours, an emergency board review was scheduled because the directors finally understood that the woman they had treated like an interchangeable employee possessed the clearest documentation of how their supposedly record-breaking results had actually been produced. At the investor meeting, Victor arrived expecting to announce another record quarter, but instead the board chair interrupted his presentation and informed the room that an independent review had uncovered serious discrepancies involving revenue attribution, executive bonuses, and employee compensation. And when Victor tried to blame internal misunderstandings, the chair simply asked, "Then why do the original documents tell a different story?" Nora was not standing beside him, nor was she celebrating from the audience. She was watching remotely from Summit Arc's New Denver office, where her former team had gathered around a conference table, because her resignation had taken effect that morning, and the board had accepted her evidence without asking her to remain in the environment that had spent months undermining her. 3 months later, Horizon Meridian had replaced its CEO, launched a formal compensation review, and lost several major clients after the investigation revealed how much of its growth had depended on the relationships Nora's team had built, while Summit Arc had doubled the size of its enterprise division under Nora's leadership and earned a reputation for actually rewarding the people responsible for its success. Nora never posted a triumphant message online, never mocked Victor, and never told the story as a tale about destroying an enemy. Instead, on the first anniversary of her departure, she gathered her team at a quiet restaurant, raised her glass, and said, "We didn't leave because we were angry. We left because we finally understood our value," before smiling as Lily placed a small handwritten card beside her plate that read, "Thank you for teaching us that respect is part of the paycheck, too." The following Monday, Nora walked into her office before sunrise, looked at the city lights fading beyond the windows, and opened a message from a young employee asking how she had found the courage to walk away from a powerful company after nearly a decade of service. And she answered with the lesson she wished someone had taught her years earlier. You don't have to burn the building down to prove it was on fire. Sometimes the strongest move is to gather the truth, protect your people, leave with your integrity intact, and build somewhere better. She closed the laptop, looked toward the conference room where her team was already arriving, and realized that the greatest reward had never been the bonus Horizon Meridian refused to pay. It was knowing that the people who once depended on her leadership now knew how to recognize their own worth. And that was something no executive, contract, or cheap company gift could ever take away. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.